The air inside Silver Oaks Senior Living always smelled faintly of lemon wax and artificial lavender. For Alina, that smell had been the backdrop of her life for 12 years. She wasn't just an employee. She was the person who remembered that Mr. Henderson liked 2 ice cubes in his apple juice, and that Mrs. Gable hated the sound of the evening news. Alina sat at her mahogany desk. The one her boss, Mr. Sterling, insisted remain completely clear of personal items. No photos of her daughter, no stray coffee mugs, just a computer and a stack of folders. To the corporate office, Silver Oaks was a high-yield asset. To Alina, it was a collection of stories, most of which were nearing their final chapters. She clicked through the morning reports, her eyes landing on a red flag in the billing system. It was room 402, Arthur. Arthur was 92 years old and walked with a hitch in his hip that he claimed was a souvenir from his time in the service. He didn't have much, just a collection of old jazz records and a framed photo of a woman named Rose who had passed away 40 years ago. He was the kind of man who would wait by the front desk just to ask Alina how her day was. Even when his own legs were clearly aching, the red flag indicated that Arthur's account was 60 days past due. In the world of Silver Oaks, 60 days was the point of no return. Alina, a word? She looked up to see Mr. Sterling leaning against her doorframe. He didn't wait for her to answer before walking in and tapping the computer screen right where Arthur's name was highlighted. "I see you've found the problem," Sterling said. "The bank sent over a final notice. Apparently, the pension fund he relies on has hit some kind of legal snag. The payments aren't coming through. It's a mess." Alina felt a tightening in her chest. "He's been here for 6 years, sir. He's never missed a payment before this. It's clearly a technical error on their end. If we just give him a few weeks to get it sorted, we aren't a charity," Lena Sterling interrupted, his voice dropping into that rehearsed, professional tone he used when he was about to do something cold. "The board is looking at the margins this quarter. We have a waiting list of people who can pay the full entrance fee up front. I need his room cleared by Friday." "Friday? That's 3 days from now," Elena whispered. "He has no family. Where is he supposed to go? If you put him in a state-run facility at his age, the shock alone could... She stopped, her voice trembling slightly. "That isn't our concern," Sterling said, straightening his tie. "Our concern is the health of this business. I'm giving you the lead on this because the residents trust you. Make it a smooth transition. Don't make me bring in a third-party mediator. It's better coming from a friend, right?" He left the room before she could argue. Alina sat in the silence, the hum of the air conditioner feeling suddenly deafening. She stood up and walked down the hallway toward the west wing. She passed the dining hall, where the clinking of silverware and the low murmur of conversation usually felt comforting. Today it felt like a countdown. When she reached room 402, the door was cracked open. Arthur was sitting in his armchair, the sunlight hitting the dust motes dancing in the air. He was listening to a scratchy record, his eyes closed, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the arm of the chair. "Arthur?" she said softly, knocking on the wood. He opened his eyes, and a genuine, bright smile broke across his weathered face. "Ah, the light of my life. Come in, Alina. I was just thinking about that time you brought in those homemade cookies. The ones with the sea salt? My goodness, I can still taste them." Alina felt a lump in her throat so large she could hardly swallow. She looked around the small room. It was filled with his life. The books with broken spines, the old radio, the small medal pinned to a velvet cushion on the dresser. "Is everything okay, dear?" Arthur asked, his smile fading as he read her expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Lena forced a smile, though it felt brittle. She couldn't tell him, not yet. She couldn't be the one to tell this man who had survived wars and the loss of everyone he loved that he was being discarded because of a computer error and a corporate bottom line. "I'm just tired, Arthur." "Long morning," she lied. She walked over and adjusted the blanket over his knees. "I wanted to check on you. Are you feeling okay today?" "Better than I deserve," he chuckled, patting her hand. His skin felt like parchment thin and fragile. "I was just thinking Rose would have liked you." You have that same way of looking at people, like you're actually seeing them, not just looking past them. Alina squeezed his hand. She looked at the photo of Rose on the nightstand. She thought about the zero-tolerance policy manual sitting in her desk drawer. Section 4, Paragraph 12. Employees shall not interfere with the financial or legal proceedings of residents. Any attempt to bypass corporate billing protocols will result in immediate termination. She knew what she was supposed to do. She was supposed to go back to her office, print out the eviction paperwork, and call the transport service. She was supposed to protect her job. She had a daughter in college. She had bills. She was 5 years away from her own retirement, but as she looked at Arthur, who was now humming along to the music, she realized she couldn't live with the version of herself that walked out that door and let him be thrown away. She left his room and didn't go back to her office. Instead, she went to the staff break room, sat in a corner where the security cameras couldn't see her face, and pulled her personal laptop from her bag. She logged into her own bank account. The balance wasn't much. Covering Arthur's arrears and the next 2 months of rent would take almost every penny she had. Her finger hovered over the transfer button. She knew the system. If she processed the payment as a private, anonymous gift through the resident portal, it might buy him enough time for his pension to be restored. But she also knew that if Sterling found out she had used her own funds to undermine a board decision, there would be no warnings, no second chances. Alina took a deep breath. She thought about the lemon wax, the artificial lavender, and the cold mahogany desk. She realized that for the first time in 12 years, she didn't care about the rules. She clicked confirm. The screen blinked. Transaction successful. Alina closed her laptop. Her hands were shaking, but for the first time in weeks, the weight in her chest had lifted. She didn't know then that this one click was the beginning of the end of her life as she knew it, the start of something she never could have dreamed of. The days following Alina's decision felt like walking on a thin sheet of ice. Every time the phone rang on her desk or a new email notification popped up, her heart would give a sharp, painful thud against her ribs. She tried to keep her head down, focusing on the mundane tasks of her job. But the weight of what she had done sat heavy in her pocket, or more accurately, in the empty space where her savings used to be. She found herself visiting Arthur more often. She told herself she was just checking on him, but in reality, she was looking for reassurance that her sacrifice was worth it. She would find him in the courtyard, sitting on the wooden bench that faced the rose bushes. He looked peaceful. That peace was something Alina had bought for him, and seeing it made the fear of getting caught feel a little more bearable. "You're working too hard, Alina," Arthur said one Tuesday afternoon. He was wearing his old wool cardigan, despite the warmth of the sun. "You have that look in your eye. Like you're trying to solve the world's problems before lunch." Alina sat down beside him, breathing in the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. "Maybe just 1 or 2 problems, Arthur. Not the whole world." "Well, don't forget to live your own life while you're at it," he cautioned, his voice raspy but kind. "I spent too many years worrying about the what-ifs. Now that I'm at the end of the book, I realized the best chapters were the ones where I stopped planning and just started being." Alina nodded, wishing she could tell him that he was only still sitting on that bench because she had gambled her entire future on him. But she just smiled and patted his hand. "I'll try to remember that." Back inside, the atmosphere was different. Mr. Sterling was on the warpath. A group of regional directors was scheduled to visit the following week, and he wanted everything to be perfect. He was obsessed with the optics of the facility. He ordered the carpets deep cleaned, the staff uniforms replaced, and, most importantly, the financial books scrubbed clean. Alina spent her Wednesday afternoon in the back office, helping the accounting clerk. A soft-spoken woman named Clara organized the digital files. Clara was good at her job, perhaps too good. She had a way of spotting a decimal point out of place from a mile away. "That's strange," Clara muttered, squinting at her dual monitors. Alina felt a cold chill wash over her. She kept her voice steady, though her throat felt dry. "What is it?" "Room 402. "Arthur's account?" Clara said, clicking her mouse rapidly. I remember seeing the notice on Sterling's desk. But when I opened the ledger today, the balance is zero. A payment came through late Friday night. Alina leaned over, pretending to study the screen. Maybe the pension issue got resolved faster than they expected. No, Clara shook her head, her brow furrowed. It didn't come from the pension fund. It was an external transfer through the guest portal. And it wasn't just the arrears. Someone paid forward for the next 2 months. It's a huge sum of money. There's no name attached, just a generic transaction ID. Well, maybe he has a distant relative who stepped up, Alina suggested, her heart hammering against her chest. Clara looked at Alina, and for a second, Alina thought she saw a flicker of suspicion in the other woman's eyes. I hope so. Sterling was ready to put that poor man on the street. I'll have to report the payment source to him, though. He's been asking about 402 every morning. Alina left the accounting office feeling like the walls were closing in. She went to the restroom and splashed cold water on her face. She looked at herself in the mirror. She looked older. The stress was etching lines around her eyes that hadn't been there a month ago. She told herself that even if she got fired, she had done the right thing. But the reality of unemployment, the reality of not being able to pay her own rent started to sink in. Thursday passed in a blur of nervous energy. Alina stayed late, finishing every report, answering every email, and making sure every resident's needs were met. It was as if she was subconsciously saying goodbye to the building. On Friday morning, the air in the lobby felt heavy. When Alina walked in, the receptionist didn't give her the usual cheery good morning. She just looked down at her desk, avoiding eye contact. Alina hadn't even taken off her coat when she saw Mr. Sterling standing at the end of the hallway. He wasn't moving. He was just watching her. He didn't have his usual fake smile. His face was a mask of cold, hard professional anger. In my office. Now, he said. It wasn't an invitation. Alina followed him. As she walked past the break room, she saw Clara sitting at the table, looking pale and holding a coffee mug with both hands. Clara looked up and gave Alina a look of pure apology. Alina knew then. The anonymous transaction ID hadn't been so anonymous after all. In her haste and her emotional state, she had used her home IP address to make the payment. Or perhaps the bank records had linked back to her name through a shared system she hadn't considered. Sterling sat behind his desk and didn't ask Alina to sit. He turned his computer monitor around so she could see the screen. It was a printout of the transaction log, and highlighted in yellow was the digital footprint that led straight back to her personal account. Do you want to tell me what this is? Sterling asked. His voice was dangerously quiet. It's a payment for a resident who was about to be unfairly evicted, Alina said, her voice stronger than she expected. It is a violation of every contract you signed when you took this job, Sterling snapped, his voice rising. It is a breach of ethics. It is financial meddling. We have strict rules against employees forming financial dependencies with residents. It opens us up to lawsuits, Alina. If his estate finds out an employee was paying his bills, they could claim we were coercing him or manipulating his finances. He has no estate. Alina cried out. He has no one. I wasn't manipulating him. I was saving him. He's a human being, not a line item on your spreadsheet. Sterling stood up, leaning his palms on the desk. You were a good worker, Alina, but you're a liability now. You've proven that you value your own sentimentality over the policies of this company. I can't have someone like that running this floor. He pulled a manila envelope from his drawer and slid it across the desk. Your final paycheck is in there, including your unused vacation time. We aren't offering a severance package because this is a termination for cause. Security will meet you at your desk to oversee the removal of your personal items. You're firing me for being kind? Alina whispered. I'm firing you for being unprofessional, Sterling corrected. And don't bother asking for a reference. I'll be notifying the regional board about this breach. I doubt anyone in this industry will want to take a risk on someone who plays Robin Hood with the company's residents. The walk back to her desk was the longest journey of Alina's life. 2 security guards stood by as she tucked her stapler, her pens, and the small jade plant her daughter had given her into a cardboard box. The other nurses and aides watched from a distance, some with tears in their eyes, some with looks of pure shock. No one spoke. The silence was absolute. As she was being led toward the front exit, she passed the hallway leading to the West Wing. She thought of Arthur, probably sitting in the sun. Unaware that the woman who had saved him was being cast out into the cold, she walked through the sliding glass doors and into the parking lot. The bright morning sun felt like a slap in the face. She placed the box in her back seat, sat in the driver's seat, and gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. She had no job. She had no savings. She'd been blacklisted from the only career she had known for over a decade. She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror and saw a woman who had lost everything for a stranger. As she drove away, she didn't feel like a hero. She felt terrified. But as she turned the corner, she saw the roof of Silver Oaks disappearing behind the trees. And she whispered to the empty car, "At least he's still in his bed today." She had no way of knowing that while she was driving home to an uncertain future, the miracle was already starting to stir in a place she would never have expected. The first few days of unemployment felt like a heavy fog that wouldn't lift. Alina found herself waking up at 6 a.m. out of habit, reaching for her work lanyard on the nightstand, before remembering it wasn't there anymore. The silence of her small apartment was deafening. Every time she looked at her bank app and saw the double-digit balance, a cold spike of panic shot through her chest. She spent her mornings at the local library, using their computers to search for jobs. But Mr. Sterling had been true to his word. The healthcare world was small, and word traveled fast. She applied for administrative roles at 3 different clinics and 2 other senior homes. 2 of them didn't call back at all. The third one called her in for an interview. But the atmosphere shifted the moment the hiring manager looked at her references. "It says here you left Silver Oaks due to a policy violation regarding resident finances," the manager said, closing the folder. "In this industry, trust is everything." "I'm sorry, Alina, we just can't take the risk." Alina walked out of that office, feeling like she had a scarlet letter branded on her forehead. She sat in her car and cried not for the money, but for the unfairness of it all. She had spent a decade caring for people, and now she was being treated like a criminal for the one time. She had cared too much, while Alina was struggling to find her footing. Things were stirring back at Silver Oaks. Julian, a 19-year-old who worked in the kitchen, had seen the whole thing go down. Julian was a quiet kid, usually seen pushing a meal cart with headphones on, but he saw more than people realized. He had seen Alina sneak extra blankets to residents on cold nights. He had seen her stay late to hold the hand of a woman who was afraid of the dark. And he had seen the way the security guards had marched her out like she had stolen the silverware. One afternoon, while Julian was delivering a tray of mashed potatoes and steamed carrots to room 402, he found Arthur looking confused. "Where's Alina?" Arthur asked, his voice trembling slightly. "She hasn't been by to check my blood pressure in 3 days. That young man from the night shift came in, but he was in such a hurry he didn't even say hello." Julian looked at the old man. He knew the staff had been told to tell the residents that Alina moved on to a new opportunity. "She's gone, Arthur," Julian said quietly. "The big bosses let her go because she paid your rent. They found out she used her own savings to keep you here, and they said it broke the rules." Arthur sat in stunned silence. The color drained from his face. "She did what?" "She paid for you," Julian repeated, "and they fired her for it." Later that night, Julian did something he had never done before. He sat at his cracked laptop and wrote a post on a local community Facebook group. He wasn't a writer, but he wrote from the heart. He described the lemon wax palace that cared more about gold than people. And he told the story of the woman who gave her last penny to save a veteran's home. He didn't think anyone would notice. But the internet is a strange, unpredictable thing. By the next morning, the post had 500 shares. By evening, it had 5,000. People in the town were outraged. They knew Silver Oaks. They knew how expensive it was. And the idea of a loyal worker being fired for an act of mercy touched a nerve. A local reporter named Leo saw the post. Leo was used to writing about school board meetings and stray dogs, but he smelled a real story here. He tracked down Julian, who pointed him toward Elena's apartment complex, when the knock came on Elena's door. She was eating a bowl of plain cereal for dinner, trying to figure out which bill she could skip that month. She opened the door to find a man with a notepad and a camera slung over his shoulder. "Elena, my name is Leo. I'm with the Gazette," he said. "I heard what happened at Silver Oaks. I think the people in this city deserve to know the truth about why their best healthcare worker is sitting at home instead of helping our seniors." Elena was hesitant. "I don't want to cause trouble," she said, her voice small. "I just wanted to help Arthur. Because people like you usually don't ask for the spotlight. But right now, the spotlight is the only thing that might change the system." They sat at her small kitchen table for 2 hours. Elena told him everything, not with anger, but with a deep, quiet sadness. She talked about the way the industry had shifted from care to management. Talked about Arthur's service to his country and how he deserved more than a cold eviction notice. The article hit the front page of the Sunday paper. The headline was simple: "The cost of compassion, fired for a finished debt." The reaction was like a dam breaking. The phone at Silver Oaks started ringing off the hook with angry callers. People began protesting on the sidewalk outside the facility's iron gates, holding signs that read "People over profits" and "Bring back Elena." But the biggest turn of events happened 300 miles away in a high-rise office building. A man named Mr. Vance sat in his study, reading the digital version of Leo's article. Mr. Vance was a billionaire who had made his fortune in tech, but he was currently a man haunted by regret. 2 years earlier, his own mother had passed away in a facility very similar to Silver Oaks. He had paid for the best care money could buy. He had always wished he could find a place that actually cared. He looked at the photo of Elena in the article, a woman with kind eyes and tired shoulders who had risked her livelihood for a stranger. Mr. Vance picked up his phone and, "I want you to find this woman, not for an interview. I want to know what it would cost to build her a building of her own, a place where the rules are written by her, not by some board of directors." Elena was unaware of Mr. Vance. She was currently staring at her phone, which was buzzing with hundreds of messages from strangers. Some were offering her $5, others were offering her prayers. But then a notification popped up that made her heart stop. It was an email from the banking institution that handled Arthur's pension. Subject: urgent correction regarding resident #402. The miracle wasn't just that people were listening. It was that the truth was finally starting to catch up with the greed. Elena stood up, her legs feeling like jelly, and realized that for the first time since she was escorted out by security, she wasn't afraid. She didn't know how she was going to pay her rent, but she knew that the act of compassion hadn't just saved Arthur. It had started a fire that was about to burn down everything she thought she knew about her life, making room for something much more beautiful to grow. The week following the newspaper article was a whirlwind that Elena could barely process. Her quiet apartment, once a place of lonely stress, had become the center of a local movement. She spent most of her time sitting at her small kitchen table, watching the news clips of people gathered outside Silver Oaks, the corporation that owned the facility. A massive group called Global Care Holdings tried to fight back. They released a formal statement calling Elena's actions a dangerous precedent and unauthorized financial manipulation. They tried to paint her as someone who had gone rogue, but the public wasn't buying it. People saw through the corporate jargon. They saw a woman who had used her heart in a world that usually only used its head. Inside Silver Oaks, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mr. Sterling remained locked in his office, his blinds drawn tight. The staff, the nurses, the cleaners, and the cooks began wearing small blue ribbons on their uniforms. It was a silent protest, a nod to Elena's favorite color. Arthur sat in his room watching the protests from his window. He felt a heavy guilt in his chest. He knew that Elena's life had been turned upside down because of him. He asked the night nurse to bring him a pen and a piece of paper. With shaking hands, he began to write a letter. He didn't write to the board of directors. He wrote to the city. He wrote about what it felt like to be 92 years old and told you are no longer worth the space you occupy. He wrote about how Alina was the only person who made him feel like a man instead of a resident. Julian, the young kitchen worker, took that letter and posted a photo of it online. It went more viral than the first post. The image of the old veteran's shaky handwriting broke the hearts of thousands. While this storm raged, Alina was at her lowest point financially. She had exactly $12 left in her purse. She had applied for a job at a local grocery store just to make ends meet. But even they were hesitant to hire her because of the controversy surrounding her name. She sat on her sofa, her head in her hands, wondering if she had made a mistake. She had saved Arthur's home, but she was about to lose her own. Then her phone rang. It was an unknown number from a different area code. "Hello?" She answered, her voice tired. "Is this Alina?" The voice on the other end was deep, calm, and sounded like someone used to being listened to. "Yes, this is she." "My name is Thomas Vance," the man said. "I've been reading about you, Alina. And more importantly, I've been reading about Arthur." Alina sat up straighter. "Sir, if you're a reporter, I've said all I can say." "I'm not a reporter," Mr. Vance replied with a small chuckle. "I'm a man who spent a lot of money trying to find a place that would treat my mother with the kind of dignity you gave Arthur for free. I never found it. So, I decided I'm going to build it instead." Alina was confused. "I don't understand." "I own a piece of land on the north side of the city," Mr. Vance continued. "It's 15 acres of beautiful woods and meadow. I've had architects drawing up plans for a senior living community for a year, but I couldn't find the right person to lead it. I don't want a businessman. I don't want a manager who stares at spreadsheets." Alina's heart began to race. "Mr. Vance, I'm just an administrator." "No," he interrupted gently. "You are the soul of what this industry should be. I want to offer you the position of executive director of the Rose Sanctuary. We'll name it after Arthur's wife. You'll have a full salary, a budget to hire the best staff, and most importantly, you'll have the final say on every resident. If someone falls on hard times, they don't get an eviction notice. They get a seat at the table." Alina couldn't speak. Tears began to stream down her face, hitting the worn fabric of her jeans. It felt like a dream, the kind of dream you have right before you wake up to a cold reality. "There's one more thing," Mr. Vance said. "I know you're struggling right now. My assistant has already sent a courier to your apartment. There's a check in there to cover your expenses for the next 6 months, regardless of whether you take the job. I don't want the person who saved Arthur to have to worry about her own rent tonight." Alina leaned back against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor. "Why are you doing this?" "Because the world needs to see that kindness isn't a weakness," he said. "And because I think Arthur would like a room with a view of the meadow." An hour later, there was a knock at her door. A man in a crisp uniform handed her an envelope. Inside was a check that made her gasp. But more importantly, there was a small note that said, "Start thinking about who you want to hire. We open in 6 months." The news of Elena's new venture leaked the next day. The miracle was no longer just a headline. It was becoming a reality. But there was still one piece of the puzzle left. Arthur was still inside Silver Oaks, and the corporation was digging in their heels, refusing to let him go easily or admit they were wrong. Alina put on her best professional suit. She didn't look like a woman who had been fired anymore. She looked like a woman with a mission. She drove to Silver Oaks one last time. This time, she didn't go through the back entrance. She walked right through the front doors, past the protesters who cheered when they saw her, and headed straight for Mr. Sterling's office. The security guards started to move toward her, but they hesitated. They knew her. They liked her. And they knew the whole city was watching. She pushed open Sterling's door without knocking. He looked up, his face pale and exhausted. "You can't be here, Alina," he stammered. "Dodd not here as an employee, George," she said, using his first name for the first time. "And I'm here to collect my first resident." She laid a folder on his desk. It was a legal transfer document backed by Mr. Vance's high-powered legal team. It didn't just request Arthur's release. It detailed the accounting errors and the harassment Arthur had faced, threatening a massive lawsuit if he wasn't allowed to leave with his dignity intact. Sterling looked at the papers. The board had already been breathing down his neck to make the problem go away. "Take him," Sterling whispered, defeated. Alina didn't say another word. She turned and walked toward room 402. When she opened the door, Arthur was already packed. He had his jazz records in a small box and Rose's photo tucked under his arm. Julian was standing there, helping him. "Ready to go home, Arthur?" Alina asked, her eyes shining. Arthur looked at her, his eyes welling up with tears. "I heard the news, Alina. A sanctuary? For us? For everyone," she promised. As they walked out of the building together, Lena on one side of Arthur and Julian on the other, the crowd outside went silent for a moment, then erupted into a roar of applause. It wasn't just a victory for one woman or one old man. It was a victory for the idea that a single act of compassion can change the world. But the real miracle was yet to come. Because as they drove away, Arthur handed Alina a small, dusty envelope he had been keeping in his pocket. "Should read this," he said. "It's from the bank. It came this morning." The sun was setting behind the rolling hills of the north side of the city, casting a warm, golden glow over the white pillars of the Rose Sanctuary. It didn't look like a medical facility. There were no fluorescent lights, no sterile linoleum floors, and certainly no smell of lemon wax and chemicals. Instead, there were wide wooden porches, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the sound of wind chimes dancing in the breeze. Alina stood on the front lawn, looking up at the sign. It was carved from oak. It read, "Founded on compassion." 6 months had passed since she walked out of Silver Oaks. In that time, she hadn't just built a building. She had built a community. She had hired Julian to run the kitchen, giving the young man the formal culinary training he deserved. She had hired Clara, the accountant who had tried to warn her, to manage the books with a heart for the people behind the numbers. But the most important person was sitting in a rocking chair on the porch. Arthur looked younger than he had in years. The gray paleness of his skin had been replaced by a healthy tan from spending his afternoons in the meadow. He was currently reading a book, a soft smile on his face. He was the sanctuary's first resident. He would never have to worry about a bill again. Alina walked up the steps and sat on the railing near him. "Big day tomorrow, Arthur. We have 3 more families moving in." Arthur closed his book and looked at her. "You did it, Alina. You really did it. Most people just talk about changing things. You actually went and moved the mountain. You moved it together," she corrected him. "And speaking of moving mountains, I think it's time I finally talked to you about that letter." She pulled the dusty envelope from her pocket, the one Arthur had handed her the day they left. Silver Oaks. She had kept it safe all these months. "I was afraid to open it back then. I thought it was more bad news. More lawyers, more mistakes." "I know," Alina said softly. "But I called the bank last week to confirm. I needed to be sure before I told you." She opened the letter and read it aloud. It wasn't a notice of debt. It turns out that the banking error that had started this whole mess was actually a massive oversight regarding a long-forgotten life insurance policy held by his late wife, Rose, because the payments had been caught in a legal loop for decades. The interest had compounded. The miracle wasn't just that Alina had saved him. It was that Arthur was actually a very wealthy man. The policy payout was enough to cover his care 10 times over. Arthur sat in silence, a single tear rolling down his cheek. "She was still looking out for me," he whispered. "All those years. Rose was waiting for the right moment to help." "There's more," Alina said, her voice thick with emotion. "I talked to Mr. Vance. Since he already funded the construction of this place, he wants to use your windfall to start a scholarship fund. It's going to be called the Arthur and Rose Grant. It will pay for the training of nurses and caregivers. who want to work in elder care but can't afford the schooling. Your story is going to make sure that no one ever has to choose between their paycheck and their heart again. Arthur reached out and took Elena's hand. I don't need the money, Elena. I have everything I need right here. I have a home. I have my records. And I have a daughter not by blood, but by spirit. Elena leaned over and hugged him tightly. In that moment, the pain of being fired, the fear of the blacklisting, and the nights of eating plain cereal in the dark all felt like a small price to pay. She realized that her life hadn't been ruined that day in the boardroom. It had been redirected. The next morning, the grand opening ceremony was small and private. There were no cameras, no politicians, and no corporate banners. There was just a small group of people who believed in something better. Mr. Vance stood in the back, watching with a quiet smile of satisfaction. He didn't want the credit. He just wanted to see the light back in people's eyes. Julian served a meal that smelled of fresh herbs and roasting. The first new family arrived, a nervous daughter, and her elderly father, who looked just as scared as Arthur once had. Elena stepped forward. She didn't check their financial statements first. She didn't look at their credit score. She took the old man's hand, looked him in the eye, and said the words she had always wanted to say without fear of a corporate handbook. Welcome home. You're safe now. We've been waiting for you. As the sun began to dip below the horizon on their first official day, Elena looked out over the meadow. She thought about Mr. Sterling and the cold halls of Silver Oaks. She didn't feel any anger toward them anymore. In a strange way, she felt grateful. If they hadn't been so cold, she might never have found the fire within herself to build something so warm. The act of compassion hadn't just been a single moment in time. It was a seed. And as Elena watched the residents and staff laughing together on the porch, she knew that seed had grown into a forest that would provide shade and shelter for generations to come. The miracle wasn't the money, and it wasn't the building. The miracle was the reminder that when you choose to do what is right, the universe has a way of making sure you aren't standing alone for long. Elena walked inside, closing the door softly behind her. Ready to start the best chapter of her life? 5 years had passed since the gates of the Rose Sanctuary first opened. In the world of healthcare, 5 years can feel like a lifetime. But here, time seemed to move differently. It moved in the rhythm of morning walks, the slow turning of pages in the library, and the steady, quiet growth of the oak trees that lined the driveway. Elena stood in the center of the garden, which had become the heart of the community. She was no longer the stressed, tired woman who sat behind a mahogany desk at Silver Oaks. Her hair had a bit more silver in it now, but her eyes were bright and her spirit was settled. She had become a symbol in the city, a living proof that you could run a successful business without losing your soul. The sanctuary had grown. There were now 4 houses on the property, each named after a flower, and each designed to feel like a family home rather than a facility. But despite the growth, Elena still knew every resident by name. She still knew who liked their tea extra hot and who needed a little extra encouragement on rainy days. She looked toward the porch of the main house. Arthur's rocking chair was empty today. Arthur had passed away peacefully 2 months ago at the age of 97. He hadn't died in a cold, sterile room with a stranger checking his vitals. He had passed away in his sleep, in his own bed, with the window open so he could hear the birds, and with Elena sitting by his side, reading him the poetry of Rose's favorite authors. His passing had been a celebration of a life well lived, but it had left a hole in the sanctuary that everyone felt. Today was the day they were going to fill that hole with a permanent memory. Julian walked across the grass to meet Elena. He was no longer the shy kid from the kitchen. He was now the head of culinary operations, a man who spoke with confidence and wore a chef's coat with pride. Julian asked softly. Elena nodded. They're waiting in the meadow. They walked together toward the highest point of the property, a hill that overlooked the entire sanctuary and the city beyond. Almost every resident and staff member was there. There were no uniforms today, just a group of friends gathered in the grass. In the center of the crowd was a new bronze statue. It wasn't a statue of a famous leader or a war hero, though Arthur had been the latter. It was a statue of an old man sitting on a bench holding a hand out as if waiting for someone to sit beside him. On the bench, carved into the bronze, was a single record player. Alina stepped forward to speak. She didn't have a written speech. She didn't need one. "When I first met Arthur," she began, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet afternoon air, "I thought I was the one helping him. I thought I was the one with the power, the one with the resources, and the one making the sacrifice. I was so wrong." She looked at the faces of the people who lived there, people who had been turned away from other places. People who had been told they were too difficult or too expensive. "Arthur taught me that compassion isn't a transaction," Alina continued. "It's a connection. He taught me that the rules of the world are often designed to protect things that don't matter, while ignoring the things that do. He showed me that a single act of kindness doesn't just change the person receiving it, changes the person giving it. It changed me. It gave me a life I never thought I deserved." She signaled to Julian, who opened the wooden box. Inside was a small vintage record player. He set it on a table nearby and placed a needle on a scratchy, well-worn jazz record, Arthur's favorite, as the music began to play. The wind seemed to pick up, carrying the melody through the trees. "Today, we officially dedicate this meadow as Arthur's rest," Alina said. "But more than that, we dedicate ourselves to the promise we made 5 years ago. We will never be a place of units or beds. We will always be a place of stories. And every time someone feels like they have nowhere left to go, they will find a seat on this bench." The crowd spent the afternoon sharing stories. Some talked about Arthur's terrible jokes, others about his wisdom. A young nurse, one of the first recipients of the Arthur and Rose Grant, spoke about how she had almost given up on her career until she heard the story of the woman who got fired for a veteran. "I realized then," the nurse said, "that I didn't want to just be a nurse. I wanted to be an Alina." As the event wound down, a car pulled into the driveway. A man stepped out, looking hesitant. He was in his 50s, dressed in an expensive suit that looked out of place in the meadow. Alina recognized him immediately. It was Mr. Sterling. He hadn't been seen in the industry since. Silver Oaks had been bought out and restructured following the scandal. He looked older, tired, and stripped of the corporate arrogance he once carried. He walked up to Alina, his hands in his pockets. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said. I wanted to see it for myself." Alina didn't feel the surge of anger she expected. Instead, she felt a profound sense of pity. "It's a beautiful day for it, George." Sterling looked at the statue, then out at the happy, thriving community Alina had built. "You were right, you know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I spent 30 years following the handbook. I thought the handbook would protect me. But in the end, it just left me with a lot of empty rooms and a reputation I can't outrun. You followed your heart, and you ended up with all of this. It's never too late to change the way you see people." George, Alina said gently. He looked at her. A flicker of something, maybe hope, maybe regret, in his eyes. "Maybe not. I'm doing some consulting for a small nonprofit now. It's not much, but it's different." He turned to leave, but stopped. "I'm glad you didn't listen to me that day, Alina. The world would be a much darker place if you had." As he drove away, Alina walked back to the main house. She passed the kitchen, where Julian was laughing with a new apprentice. She passed the library, where a group of residents were started a book club. She felt a deep, soul-level peace. She went into her office, a room with a messy desk, filled with photos of her daughter, drawings from the staff's children, and a framed copy of that first newspaper article. She sat down and looked at a new application on her screen. It was for a woman who had no money and no family, much like Arthur had been. She clicked approve. As she did, the record player outside reached the end of the song. For a moment, there was total silence. Then, a new song began, a bright, upbeat swing tune that Rose used to love. Alina smiled, leaning back in her chair. The miracle hadn't ended with the opening of the building. The miracle was happening every single day, in every single room. every single person who chose love over the rules. Her act of compassion had cost her a job, but it had given her the world. And as she looked out at the sun setting over Arthur's Rest, she knew that this was exactly where she was meant to be. The story of the woman who was fired was over. The story of the woman who built a sanctuary was just beginning, 10 years after the first. Brick was laid at the Rose Sanctuary. The morning air still carried that same sense of hope. Alina was 65 now, and she spent more time in the garden than in the office. She had officially stepped down as the executive director, passing the keys to the one person she trusted more than anyone, her daughter, Maya. Maya had grown up watching her mother lose everything for a stranger, and then build a miracle out of the ashes. She didn't want to be a doctor or a lawyer. She wanted to be a guardian of stories, just like her mother. On this particular morning, Maya was standing at the front gates, waiting for the arrival of the newest group of students. These weren't just any students. They were the Compassion Fellows, the young men and women funded by the Arthur and Rose Grant. Among them was a young woman named Clara, named after the accountant who had once helped Alina. This younger Clara had grown up in a foster home, but because of the fund Alina and Mr. Vance had created, she was now 3 months away from becoming a registered nurse. "Welcome," Maya said, her voice sounding so much like Elena's that it made the longtime staff members smile. "You aren't here just to learn how to check pulses or dispense medicine. You are here to learn how to listen. In this place, the most important tool you have isn't a stethoscope, it's your heart." Alina watched from the porch, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. She felt a presence beside her. It was Julian. He was older now, a respected chef who had mentored dozens of kids from the local neighborhood. "She's a natural," Alina, Julian said, nodding toward Maya. "She has your fire. She has her own fire." Julian, Alina replied softly. "I just gave her the match." As the students toured the grounds, they stopped at the meadow. The statue of Arthur was now draped in a light vine of jasmine that smelled sweet in the sun. The students sat on the grass, and Maya told them the story. The cold boardroom, the $12 left in a purse, and the man who loved jazz, and a woman named Rose. "The world will tell you that you have to choose between being successful and being kind," Maya told the students. "They will tell you that the rules are there to protect the business. But I want you to look around. This entire sanctuary, these homes."
Ow.
One of the students, a tall young man who had been quiet the whole time, raised his hand. "But what happens when it gets hard? What happens when the money runs low or the system tries to shut you down again?" Alina stood up from her rocking chair and walked down the porch steps. The students turned to look at her. She didn't look like a legendary founder. She looked like a grandmother in a denim apron. "You find your Arthur," Alina said, her voice steady and warm. "In every job you take, there will be someone that the system wants to overlook. There will be someone who is too much trouble or not profitable enough. When you find that person, you stand by them. Because when you protect the most vulnerable person in the room, you protect the soul of the entire world. The money follows the mission, not the other way around." Later that afternoon, a small ceremony was held in the community hall. It was the anniversary of the day Arthur moved in. To celebrate, Julian had prepared Arthur's favorite meal pot roast with extra carrots and homemade rolls. A new resident, a woman who had only arrived 2 days prior, sat at a table with the young students. She was shy, her hands trembling as she reached for a glass of water. Young Clara, the student, didn't just watch. She didn't call for an aid. She sat down next to the woman, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, and started talking to her about the flowers in the garden. Alina watched the scene from the doorway. She saw the way the young student leaned in to listen. She saw the way the old woman's shoulders relaxed. The miracle wasn't a one-time event. It wasn't a check from a billionaire or a viral news story. The miracle was a chain reaction. It was one person being brave enough to be kind, which gave another person the courage to do the same. and another, as the sun began to set. Casting long shadows across Arthur's rest, Alina walked out to the bench. She sat next to the bronze statue of her old friend. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes, listening to the music playing from the speakers hidden in the trees. It was a soft, melodic trumpet solo. She felt a sense of completion. She had been fired from a job she loved, but she had been hired by a purpose she adored. She had lost her savings, but she had gained a family that spanned across the entire city. Maya walked up the hill and sat on the other side of the statue. Thinking about him. I'm thinking about all of them, Alina said. All the people who will come here long after I'm gone. I'm thinking about how lucky I was that Mr. Sterling fired me. Maya laughed and squeezed her mother's hand. Not many people can say that, Mom. Well, Alina smiled. Not many people have an Arthur to remind them what's important. The two women sat in silence as the stars began to peek through the twilight. Below them, the lights of the sanctuary flickered on, one by one. Each light represented a room where someone was safe, someone was cared for, and someone was being treated with the dignity they deserved. The act of compassion that had once been a secret, whispered in a break room, was now a beacon on a hill. And as the night air grew cool, Alina knew that the fire she had started would never, ever go out. The story was no longer just about Alina. It was about the sanctuary. It was about the students. It was about the future. And it all started with one woman, one choice, and the belief that no one, no matter how old or how poor, should ever be left out in the cold.